Unaware his wife had just inherited a $1 billion empire, Daniel sneered across the dinner table, mocking the woman who once built his dreams with her bare hands. He laughed at her thrift store dress, called her a broke charity case, and signed the divorce papers with the arrogance of a man certain he was trading poverty for paradise. But what Daniel didn't know was that the woman he'd just discarded, the one he mocked for being poor, had that very morning become one of the richest women in the country. Now, as he prepared to marry his glamorous mistress, her silence became her weapon, her calm, her disguise. Why didn't she fight back? What secret plan was she quietly setting in motion? And when the truth of her $1 billion inheritance surfaced, who would truly end up begging for mercy? The sound of shattering glass split the penthouse air. Daniel's hand had knocked over a crystal tumbler, whiskey spilling across the marble floor like spilled arrogance. "Get out!" he snapped, voice sharp, impatient. "You can keep your old handbags and your cheap shoes, but leave my keys." She stood frozen near the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge. The Manhattan skyline glimmered through the glass wall behind him, tall, cold, indifferent. "Your keys?" she repeated softly, almost to herself. "This was our home, Daniel." He scoffed. "No, this was my home, paid for by my bonus, my work, my name, you." He let out a cruel laugh. "You were just decoration, a wife for business dinners, a liability now that I'm moving up." Outside, the faint hum of traffic climbed from Fifth Avenue, distant but steady. Inside, her world was crumbling and rebuilding at once. The envelope still sat in her handbag, the one he'd just insulted. It contained the official transfer letter from her late grandfather's estate. Her name now stood as controlling shareholder of Harper Global Holdings, a quiet empire her grandfather had built over 60 years, hidden from public records until succession. He had raised her to live simply, to be unseen, to learn people, not power. And now Daniel was revealing everything she needed to know about him. He moved toward her, grabbing a small suitcase from the couch and tossing it at her feet. "Pack what you need. You'll survive. You're good at being ordinary." Her throat tightened. There was so much she could have said, so much truth pressing behind her lips, but her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Power is quiet, Ava. Let them speak until they hang themselves with their own words." She bent down, steady hands gathering her essentials. The wedding photo on the shelf caught her eye, him smiling wide, her leaning into him, her love naive and unguarded. She took one last look before turning toward the door. He followed, muttering, "You'll thank me one day. Maybe you'll find someone who doesn't mind your kind of broke." Her kind of broke. As she stepped into the elevator, the words replayed like a knife. When the doors opened on the ground floor, she was met with the icy November wind and the sight of him below, loading luggage into the trunk of a black Range Rover. The woman beside him, tall, sleek, red lips, diamond earrings, laughed at something he said. His hand rested at her waist. Ava stood beneath the awning, her hair catching the city's harsh light. For a moment, humiliation burned deep, then cooled, replaced by something steadier, sharper. Resolve. From across the street, the building's reflection mirrored her standing alone while the car pulled away. Daniel not even glancing back. That reflection became the image she would carry, the one that would one day hang in her mind's gallery of transformation. Hours later, in a quiet hotel suite overlooking Central Park, Ava unpacked the envelope. The embossed seal of Harper Global gleamed under the lamplight. Attached was a note in her grandfather's handwriting. "You've passed the final test. The empire is yours. Use wisdom, not wrath." Her fingers traced the ink, trembling with the weight of it. A $1 billion empire, hundreds of subsidiaries, thousands of employees. The same corporation where Daniel now served as vice president of operations, proudly unaware he was climbing her ladder. She smiled faintly, a quiet, devastating smile. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Daniel, by the way, I'll send the divorce attorney's contact. Should be simple since you've got nothing to fight for. Don't make this messy." Ava exhaled slowly, set the phone aside, and poured herself a glass of water. She looked out across the park where the city lights bled into the sky like veins of gold. "No," she whispered to the night. "I won't make it messy. I'll make it unforgettable." The city didn't answer, but if it could, it might have warned Daniel that the woman he'd mocked for being poor had just stepped into the throne he'd spent his life clawing toward. And soon, the empire he believed he conquered would remind him exactly who owned every inch of it. Long before the penthouse, before the divorce papers and whiskey on marble floors, there was a small coffee shop near Wall Street where Ava Harper used to spend her mornings with her laptop, hidden behind oversized glasses and a modest cardigan. To everyone else, she was just another freelance financial analyst, quiet, observant, and unremarkable. But beneath that disguise lived the heir to one of the largest privately held corporations in the country. Her grandfather, Leonard Harper, had built Harper Global from nothing, an empire sprawling across real estate, finance, and technology. He believed in merit, humility, and secrecy. "If people love you for your last name," he told her once, "you'll never know who they are when they smile." So Ava lived under an assumed name, learned every tier of the company from the bottom up, and blended into the crowd. That was when she met Daniel. He'd spilled his coffee that morning, dark liquid across his tie, and she'd handed him a napkin before he could curse. He was charming then, awkward even, flashing a boyish grin that made her laugh. "Guess I'm not meant to look important today," he said, dabbing at his shirt. "You'll survive," she'd replied with a teasing softness. "It's just caffeine, not blood." He looked up at her, and for a moment, something unguarded passed between them. A recognition that neither quite understood yet. Over the next few weeks, he kept returning to that same coffee shop, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in her line of sight. He was ambitious, magnetic, and surprisingly gentle with her. He didn't know her family name, didn't care about her connections, because she never told him. For the first time in her life, someone saw her as Ava, not Harper. They walked the city together, shared street pretzels and cheap laughter. He talked about his dreams, how he wanted to climb the corporate ladder, prove himself, leave his modest upbringing behind. She listened, admiring the fire in him, the hunger. Maybe it reminded her of her grandfather once, before wealth dulled everything. He proposed to her on a rooftop at sunset 2 years later, a ring he'd saved months to buy glinting in his trembling hand. "I may not be rich," he'd said, voice breaking with sincerity, "but I'll make sure you never feel small with me." She believed him. Their wedding was simple, a quiet ceremony by the river. She wore a plain ivory dress. He wore a rented tuxedo. No press, no grand inheritance, no hint of the Harper fortune. For all Daniel knew, she was a financial consultant with modest savings. She wanted it that way. She wanted to know if love could survive without wealth. And for a time it did. The early years were tender and genuine. He'd leave her little notes on the fridge. "Don't work too late. You're my reason. I got that promotion thanks to your pep talks." They'd dance barefoot in their small apartment, laugh over burned dinners, whisper dreams into each other's hair. But ambition is a quiet drug. And when Daniel was hired at Harper Global's Manhattan office, ironically through a recruitment process she had secretly approved, something began to shift. At first, he was grateful. Every night he'd come home beaming, sharing stories about his progress, his projects, his excitement. But soon the gratitude turned into pride, then entitlement. He started staying later, dressing sharper, caring more about how executives saw him than how she did. Ava noticed the change in his eyes, the way they lingered on expensive suits, luxury cars, and the corner offices he wanted so badly. He'd begun to measure his worth by proximity to power, never realizing he was already standing inside the empire she controlled. Her grandfather had once warned her, "You'll know who a man truly is when he thinks you have nothing to give him." The test had begun long before she realized it. When Daniel brought home his first major bonus check, he didn't thank her. He thanked the system. He joked about moving to a better apartment, maybe one with a view worthy of someone on the rise. She smiled, though a quiet sadness bloomed beneath it. He didn't notice when she started pulling away in small ways. Less laughter, fewer confessions. Quiet observation instead of reaction. She was studying him now, learning the man behind the charm. Then came the dinner. She had planned to tell him everything that night, that the company he worked for was hers, that his entire career had been quietly nurtured by her hand. She'd even brought the original Harper family crest in her purse, ready to explain it all. But he never gave her the chance. He arrived late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, grinning with the kind of confidence that didn't belong to humility anymore. When she asked softly who he'd been with, he laughed and said, "You worry too much. Maybe that's why you'll never get ahead." That was the first crack, the beginning of the unraveling. Ava sat through that dinner, listening to him talk about promotions, business trips, how some people just aren't built for success. Each word felt like a betrayal of the man she thought she knew. She left that night without saying much. She didn't need to. She'd seen it all before. Men who confused arrogance for achievement, love for leverage. And still she waited, watched, gave him time to find his way back. He never did. Instead, his ambition found a new ally, the woman with red lips and empty eyes, the one who whispered promises of power in exchange for affection. By the time Ava discovered the affair, she wasn't angry, just enlightened. The man she once pitied for having little had become the man she pitied for having everything, except integrity. And as the months passed, she began to understand her grandfather's final lesson. Power doesn't reveal character, it exposes it. The glow of success had begun to warp Daniel's reflection. Every morning, he'd stand before the mirror in his tailored suits, adjusting his tie like a man rehearsing a performance. Ava would watch him from the doorway, the same man she once helped iron his only shirt now, too absorbed in his own reflection to notice her at all. He worked at Harper Global's headquarters now, the 39th floor, with its panoramic view of Manhattan. He bragged about it constantly, telling Ava how people like him didn't stay small forever. The irony, of course, was invisible to him. Every promotion he celebrated, every project he thought he conquered, every department he managed, it all existed under her authority. Ava had orchestrated his entire rise through a silent network of loyal executives who knew her only as Ms. Harper's proxy. Her orders were discreet but absolute. She wanted to see if Daniel's love could survive prosperity. It didn't. He began to drink more, to talk louder at parties, to correct her in front of others. "You wouldn't understand," he'd say with a smirk whenever she asked about his work. "Finance isn't your world." She'd smile faintly, her expression unreadable. "No, Daniel," she'd think, "it's my empire." The mistress entered the picture not as a lover, but as a mirror, a reflection of everything Daniel wanted to see in himself. Her name was Lila Ward, a public relations director whose charm could melt through any boardroom. Lila was elegant, ambitious, and unapologetically calculating. She had the kind of confidence that fed Daniel's vanity and weaponized his insecurities. It started as late nights, preparing for presentations, then business trips, then subtle traces of perfume on his shirts. Ava noticed. She noticed everything. One evening, while Daniel claimed he was at a corporate dinner, Ava sat in her study reviewing quarterly reports. Her phone buzzed. An alert from a private investigator she had quietly hired weeks ago. Photos appeared on the screen. Daniel and Lila at a downtown restaurant, her hand resting over his, their faces too close, too familiar. Another photo showed them entering a hotel, his arm around her waist. Ava's heart didn't break. It steadied. She stared at the photos for a long while, then closed the file. Her decision was made. She began to move pieces quietly, reassigning certain executives, requesting audits on Daniel's division, aligning keyboard members who respected her grandfather's legacy. Every move was deliberate and invisible, like a chess grandmaster who already saw checkmate 10 turns ahead. At home, Daniel's cruelty escalated in proportion to his insecurity. He belittled her in front of friends, mocked her frugality, called her a dreamer with no ambition. He didn't notice the growing distance in her gaze or the faint flicker of pity that replaced love. One night she found him in the living room, drunk, bragging on a phone call. "Yeah, Lila thinks I'll be CEO soon. The old man's on his way out, and I've got the board eating out of my hand. My wife, she's harmless, Too soft to even know what I do. He didn't realize she was standing in the doorway, silent. She turned, went to her office, and wrote an email, 3 sentences long, to her chief legal counsel. Begin the succession audit. Board meeting in 10 days, full confidentiality. The machine had begun to turn. Over the next week, Daniel strutted through work, oblivious to the subtle changes surrounding him, the whispers, the documents being reviewed, the financial audits quietly unfolding. Lila kept feeding his ego, convincing him that the CEO seat was already his. At one point during a charity gala at the plaza, Lila leaned toward him, lipstick perfect, voice dripping with ambition. Once you're in charge, we'll run everything. Imagine the power, Daniel. Imagine being the one who owns the empire. He smiled as drunk on the fantasy. Soon, he said. Very soon. Ava was at the same gala, across the room, wearing a simple black gown. She stood beside Harper Global's chairman, her presence quiet but commanding. Daniel never even noticed her there. He was too busy being seen. As the night ended, she stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the city. The cold air bit her cheeks, but she felt alive for the first time in months. This was the city that had watched her lose everything. Or so Daniel thought. Now it would watch her reclaim it. She remembered her grandfather's final conversation in the hospital room, his frail hand gripping hers. When you find the one who mocks what he doesn't understand, do not destroy him in anger. Remove the illusion. Let him see who he really is. That night, Ava finally understood. Her revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about revelation. Back in the penthouse, Daniel stumbled through the door at 2 a.m., the scent of another woman on his shirt. Ava didn't look up from her papers. You're late, she said calmly. He laughed. What, are you my mother now? She closed the file, stood, and met his eyes. No, Daniel. I'm your reckoning. He blinked, confused. What's that supposed to mean? She smiled, turning off the lamp. You'll find out soon enough. He shrugged, assuming it was another emotional jab, and went to bed without another word. In the darkness, Ava stared at the ceiling, her mind a map of precision and patience. The empire her grandfather built was now fully hers. The husband who mocked her poverty was about to learn that the empire he believed he served was owned by the woman he threw away. And when the truth came out, there would be no shouting, no threats, just silence and power. The morning of the board meeting began like any other for Daniel, except for the swagger in his stride that bordered on delusion. He straightened his tie in the mirrored elevator, grinning at his reflection. CEO Daniel Harper, he said aloud, liking the sound of it, savoring the way it rolled off his tongue. He didn't notice the assistant standing beside him lower her gaze, hiding a knowing smile. Down the hall, the boardroom gleamed under soft gold light. Executives filled the long, mahogany table, murmuring in hushed tones. Lila sat near the end, dressed in her signature red, legs crossed confidently. Daniel took the seat at the head, temporarily occupied, he thought, waiting for the CEO to arrive. The atmosphere was electric, heavy with anticipation. Rumors had spread of a leadership announcement, whispers that the next phase of Harper Global's expansion would redefine the company. Daniel believed every whisper was about him. When the doors opened, the room went silent. Ava stepped in, every head turned. She wore a fitted navy suit, hair swept into a low chignon, and carried an aura that silenced the very air. Daniel blinked, confused. What are you doing here? He asked, half laughing. Ava didn't answer. She moved to the far end of the table, where the chairman, an elderly man loyal to her grandfather, rose to his feet and nodded respectfully. Ms. Harper, he said with quiet reverence, the floor is yours. The sound of her name, Harper, landed like a thunderclap. Daniel froze. Wait, what did he just call you? Ava met his eyes with calm precision. He called me by my name, she said. My full name, Ava Harper, majority shareholder, acting CEO of Harper Global Holdings. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lila's painted smile faltered. Daniel's fingers twitched against the table. You, he stammered, his voice cracking with disbelief. You can't, this is some kind of misunderstanding? Ava finished for him. No, Daniel, the misunderstanding is yours. You thought you built this. You thought your promotions came from your brilliance, your charm, your so-called leadership. Her tone was surgical, every word precise. But your entire career here existed because I allowed it. Gasps rippled through the room. She stepped closer, sliding a folder across the table toward him. Inside were documents, emails approving his hires, his salary raises, his bonuses, all signed under her authority. You see, Daniel, she continued softly, every door you walked through was opened by my hand, and every time you mocked me for being poor, you were standing on the foundation of my empire. He looked at the papers, color draining from his face. This is insane, he muttered. You can't just... I can, she said simply. And I did. Her voice remained steady, elegant, devastating. For years, I wanted to see if love could survive without power. My grandfather believed it couldn't. You proved him right. She turned to the board. Effective immediately, Daniel Cole is terminated from his position for violation of corporate ethics, conflict of interest, and misuse of company funds. His access to company assets is revoked, and all company property, including the penthouse, car, and accounts, will be repossessed by noon. The legal counsel beside her nodded, confirming the execution of the decision. Lila rose abruptly, voice sharp. You can't fire him. You have no proof of misconduct. Ava turned to her, a faint smile curving her lips. Actually, Ms. Ward, I do. Hotel invoices charged to corporate cards, fabricated PR expenses, and most importantly, your resignation letter, already drafted. She handed the folder to security, who stepped forward. The shock on Lila's face was almost theatrical, her composure crumbling as the reality hit. Escort them both out, Ava said softly. Daniel stood, chest heaving, disbelief twisting into rage. You think this is justice? You think humiliating me makes you powerful? She met his eyes, calm, level, unflinching. No, Daniel, I didn't humiliate you. You did that yourself the day you chose deceit over decency. Security guided him toward the door. As he passed her, he whispered, You'll regret this. Ava leaned in just enough for him to hear. I already regret loving you. The door closed behind them, sealing the end of his illusion. The boardroom exhaled as if waking from a spell. The chairman turned to Ava. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. She nodded, her expression composed but distant. He taught me that power doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it only needs to stand still. Outside, Daniel stumbled through the lobby, flashes of cameras and whispers following him like ghosts. Lila's heels clicked angrily beside him as security escorted them to the street. Their car, once company-owned, was already gone. For the first time, Daniel felt what true emptiness sounded like, the echo of his own downfall. Upstairs, Ava stood by the window of her new office, the very one Daniel used to admire. The skyline stretched endlessly before her, but it wasn't the view that held her attention. It was the reflection in the glass, a woman no longer invisible. Her phone buzzed, her attorney confirming the final asset transfers. Everything Daniel once called his was now officially under her name. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply whispered to herself, now it's over. But it wasn't. Not yet. The fall was just beginning, and Ava Harper was about to watch him learn what it truly meant to lose everything he never earned. The city that once applauded Daniel Cole now whispered his name like a warning. Within a week, news of his termination spread across business networks, podcasts, and industry pages. Harper Global Scandal trended for days, headlines dissecting his arrogance and affair. Photos of him leaving the skyscraper with security became the emblem of corporate downfall. The Mistress, Lila Ward, disappeared from public view, fired, blacklisted, her charm no longer currency. She'd tried reaching him a few times, but he stopped answering after realizing she'd already moved on to her next opportunity. Daniel's phone calls went unanswered. His friends, those who once flattered him at galas, avoided his number. He tried applying to new firms, but the industry had closed its doors. Harper Global's quiet influence extended far and wide. No one wanted the man who had publicly betrayed its now iconic CEO. His penthouse was repossessed within days. The luxury car he once flaunted was towed from the curb. The final humiliation came when the doorman, who used to greet him with, "Good evening, Mr. Cole," simply nodded and turned away. He moved into a modest apartment in Queens. Bare walls, secondhand furniture, silence for company. The first night there, he opened a drawer and found an old photo, him and Ava on their wedding day. She was smiling, radiant in her simplicity, holding his face between her hands like he was the most precious thing she'd ever known. He stared at it for a long time, the weight of irony pressing against his chest. He had mocked that woman, destroyed her trust, and in doing so, he had undone himself. Meanwhile, Harper Global thrived. Under Ava's leadership, the company expanded into renewable technologies, acquired struggling subsidiaries, and launched philanthropic initiatives for women in business. The press adored her story, the quiet heir who rose from invisibility to become one of the most respected CEOs in America. In interviews, she never mentioned Daniel by name. She didn't need to. Her success was the loudest silence he would ever hear. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her office, handwritten, unsteady. "Ava, you don't owe me forgiveness. I don't even know what I'd say if you gave it. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. I mocked what I couldn't comprehend. You were never small. I was. Daniel." She folded the letter gently and placed it in her desk drawer, beside her grandfather's note. "Use wisdom, not wrath." Weeks later, she visited his mother. The woman opened the door, her eyes weary but kind. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I wanted to," Ava replied. "He's struggling," his mother sighed. "He's always been chasing something. Maybe this time he'll finally stop running." They sat together, two women bound by the same man in different ways, one who raised him, one who survived him. When Ava left, Daniel's mother took her hand. "You did what you had to. Don't carry guilt for teaching him what life refused to." That night, Ava returned to her office. The city stretched beneath her again, glittering and alive. She felt no triumph, no vengeance, just peace. The quiet kind her grandfather used to describe. Power isn't about who kneels before you. It's about who you can rise above without hatred. Months passed. Harper Global became a model of ethical leadership, and Ava began mentoring young women entrepreneurs. She donated millions to education funds, hospitals, and shelters, each initiative bearing her grandfather's name. The empire that began as his vision had become her purpose. Then one rainy evening, fate offered its final act. She was leaving the building's underground garage when she saw him, leaning against a column, soaked through, holding a small envelope. His suit was worn, his eyes hollow, but there was something different in them now. Humility. She stopped a few feet away, calm but cautious. "Daniel." He nodded, voice low. "I didn't come to beg. I just needed to see you once more." He held out the envelope. "It's the money I owe you. From before. You don't need it, but I had to give it back." She took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. "You don't owe me anything," she said gently. "You owed yourself honesty, that's all." He swallowed hard. "You deserved better." "I did," she said, not unkindly. "And so did you. Before you forgot who you were." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you for not destroying me completely." She gave a faint smile. "You did that yourself." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the space between them, soft and forgiving. Then she stepped closer, handed him a small card, an invitation to a Harper Global Scholarship event. "If you ever want to start over," she said, "this foundation helps people rebuild. No one has to know your name, just your work." He looked at it, then at her. "You'd really do that? After everything?" She tilted her head, eyes calm. "Because after everything, I still believe people can change, but only when they've lost what they thought made them powerful." He nodded, slipping the card into his pocket. "Goodbye, Ava. Goodbye, Daniel." As he walked away, his figure faded into the rain, leaving her standing beneath the soft hum of city lights, stronger, freer, untouchable. Years later, Ava Harper remarried, a quiet ceremony by the river where she once married Daniel. This time, It wasn't for love born of blindness, but of truth. The man beside her loved her for her soul, not her empire. At the reception, a journalist asked how it felt to be the woman who shocked the world. Ava smiled, her eyes glinting with wisdom. I didn't shock the world, she said softly. I just stopped hiding in it. And somewhere in Queens, Daniel watched the interview on a small television. When she said those words, he smiled faintly for the first time in years. He turned off the TV and looked out at the skyline, his past now distant, his lesson eternal. In the city of ambition and betrayal, Ava Harper's name became legend, not because she inherited a billion-dollar empire, but because she proved that silence, when wielded with grace, can shake the world louder than vengeance ever could. The years turned Harper Global into an institution of grace and influence. Under Ava's leadership, the company became more than a business. It became a movement. Her policies redefined fairness, her investments rebuilt cities, and her mentorship produced leaders who spoke her name with reverence. Every corner office in the country knew her story, the woman who had been thrown out of her own penthouse and returned to reclaim the empire built in her name. To some, she was a myth. To others, a mirror of the strength they wished they had. But to Ava Harper, she was simply her grandfather's granddaughter, a woman who kept her promise not to destroy, but to restore. On the anniversary of his passing, she visited his grave in the quiet garden behind the Harper Foundation headquarters. She placed a single white rose on the headstone, her fingers tracing the inscription he'd chosen for himself. Legacy is not wealth, it's wisdom, passed on through courage. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of his voice. Use wisdom, not wrath. She smiled softly. I did, grandfather, and it worked. Somewhere far from the corporate skyline, Daniel Cole worked quietly at a small community tech center. He taught coding to teenagers from low-income neighborhoods, using skills he'd once wielded for greed to give others a start. On the wall hung a faded Harper Global Scholarship plaque, the one Ava had funded. He never told anyone who she was to him, but every time he saw her on television, graceful, poised, untouchable, he smiled, humbled by the memory of the woman who had every reason to destroy him and chose instead to build herself higher. The world remembered her as a titan, but she never chased titles again. Ava Harper built her empire on silence, survived betrayal through restraint, and won her redemption through truth. Her story became the quiet gospel of corporate America, proof that the most dangerous kind of power is the one that doesn't announce itself. And in the end, the empire he thought was his became her legend.